In this video, I'd like to put into context the history of GIS. I'm going to go over one history of GIS, which is often what is written in major textbooks. The textbook I used to use in this course, in particular, focuses on this particular history. I think it's important to know that what led us to our modern use and knowledge of GIS and GI science, but I will also contrast this in the next video with some things this history leaves out. GIS can be traced back to the 1960s when there was a lot of development of computer information systems. Basically, we were discovering the ability of the computer to organize information. Roger Tomlinson is credited with the development of the Canada Geographic Information System, which was the first real GIS. And because of this creation, he is often called the father of GIS. In 1966, there was a lot of interest in developing GISs, and Harvard, perhaps because it is Harvard, is credited with developing this mapping software called CIMAP at the Harvard Lab for Computer Graphics and Spatial Analysis. This was led by Howard Fisher. CIMAP produced images like this, which are often very dated now, but were unheard of at the time. Previously, and really up through the early 1990s, often it was easier for people to make maps by drawing them by hand. The automation of mapping was new and pretty incredible. The way that CIMAP printed was using a dot matrix printer and printing lots of different letters over each other sometimes to create shading. A graduate of the Harvard lab, Jack Dangerman, finished his landscape architecture degree and went back to Southern California, where he and his wife created ESRI Inc. At the time, it was basically a consulting firm which performed GIS analysis for clients. ESRI was renamed ESRI in the mid-2000s. Around this time, there was a lot of focus on the need for digital data. In 1972, NASA launched Landsat-1. This is the longest running monitoring of the Earth from space. If you take a remote sensing course here, you're bound to use some Landsat imagery because it's free and very useful for understanding our globe. And this is still really useful data. Landsat 8 was launched in 2013, so not that long ago. In the 1960s and 70s, ESRI was really a consulting firm that performed GIS analysis for clients. But in the early 1980s, ESRI created ArcInfo, a command line based software that they distributed beyond their company employees. AKA, if you wanted to do GIS as a government agency or business, you didn't have to build your own software or hire ESRI. You could now use the software that ESRI was using. The software was command line only, and you could plot out maps like the one on the left, but you told the computer what to do by writing out commands instead of clicking on buttons like we do now. In 1985, GPS technology was completely available for the globe for use by the military. This gets contrasted later in the century when it became available for civilian use. In the late 1980s, the US Census Bureau distributed Tiger line data. This included all sorts of data that we use as GIS users that we now take for granted. These files included roads, rivers, railroads, census unit geometries that we had never had before. So much of GIS work at this time was focused on scanning in hand-drawn maps and digitizing, aka tracing, the data into a GIS. So this was a profoundly new way to do GIS. Everyone could use this data. They could have matching lines across different users with less error. The mid-1990s was focused on the move towards the internet. In 1994, Netscape went public, and with that, the proliferation of geospatial technology across the web. One of the key things that happened was the development of MapQuest, where you could get directions without having to ask. This looks a lot different than Google Maps now, but at the time, there wasn't anything like this. If you wanted to go to your friend's house, you needed to call them and ask for directions. If you wanted to go on a long trip, you went to AAA to have them map out your route for you on what's called a triptych. Now you could do that all on your own through MapQuest. In 2000, GPS became fully available for civilian use. So this is 15 years after the it became available across the globe for military use, now it was available for everyone. At the same time, the Defense Department ended the degradation of GPS signal, and basically overnight we had higher accuracy. Again, we could now create our own GIS data by collecting data out in the field in a highly accurate way, getting it into our GIS and having those points that we collected out in the field. In 2004, OpenStreetMap was created. This was an online map like Google Maps, but where all of the data is contributed by volunteers. It kind of functions like Wikipedia. This meant that citizens could map their own neighborhoods and contribute that local knowledge to the map. What actually happened was not exactly this. The map is overlaid on satellite or aerial imagery, and so anyone can go in and map anywhere if you're able to determine that what you see was really what you're mapping. For instance, if you knew you could see a tree in the satellite image, you could put a tree on a map. In 2005, Google Earth was created. This was incredible because it integrated high-resolution satellite imagery or aerial imagery from a plane with elevation data and contributed building facades. You could create building facades with your own pictures and contribute them to Google Earth. And this was really cool and fascinating for even non-geographers. You can do fly-throughs of the Grand Canyon or of New York City. Finally, in 2007, the first iPhone was launched, which was fully GPS enabled. The internet actually looked like the internet on this phone, and the phone knew your location accurately enough to give you directions. A lot's happened since 2007. So before you take the quiz, think about what's happened since then in terms of geospatial technology. Many say that we're in the midst of a geospatial revolution. Where do you use geospatial technology? What cool geospatial tech do you often use? You might want to do some research here to be ready for a quiz question. Now let's recap. You need to have a general idea of some of the major events in the history of GI science. I don't need you to know specific dates, but just have a general idea of what happened. What else has happened since 2007 in the realm of geospatial technology? I'll see you again in the next video.